2 Maccabees chapter 13. In the 149th year, word came to Judas and his men that Antiochus Eupator was coming with a great army against Judea, and with him Lysias, his guardian, who had charge of the government. Each of them had a Greek force of 110,000 infantry, 5,300 cavalry, 22 elephants, and 300 chariots armed with scythes. Menelaus also joined them, and with utter hypocrisy urged Antiochus on, not for the sake of his country's welfare, but because he thought that he would be established in office. But the King of Kings aroused the anger of Antiochus against the scoundrel, and when Lysias informed him that this man was to blame for all the trouble, he ordered them to take him to Beroea, and to put him to death by the method that is customary in that place. For there is a tower there, 50 cubits high, full of ashes, and it has a rim running around it that on all sides inclines precipitously into the ashes. There they all push to destruction anyone guilty of sacrilege or notorious for other crimes. By such a fate it came about that Menelaus the lawbreaker died, without even burial in the earth, and this was eminently just, because he had committed many sins against the altar, whose fire and ashes were holy. He met his death in ashes. The king, with barbarous arrogance, was coming to show the Jews things far worse than those that had been done in his father's time. But when Judas heard of this, he ordered the people to call upon the Lord day and night, now if ever to help those who were on the point of being deprived of the law and their country and the holy temple, and not to let the people who had just begun to revive fall into the hands of the blasphemous nations. When they had all joined in the same petition, and had implored the merciful Lord with weeping and fasting, and lying prostrate for 3 days without ceasing, Judas exhorted them and ordered them to stand ready. After consulting privately with the elders, he determined to march out and decide the matter by the help of God before the king's army could enter Judea and get possession of the city. So, committing the decision to the Creator of the world, and exhorting his troops to fight bravely to the death for the laws, temple, city, country, and way of life, he pitched his camp near Modin. He gave his troops the watchword, God's victory, and with a picked force of the bravest young men, he attacked the king's pavilion at night and killed as many as 2,000 men in the camp. He stabbed the leading elephant and its rider. In the end, they filled the camp with terror and confusion and withdrew in triumph. This happened just as day was dawning, because the Lord's help protected him. The king, having had a taste of the daring of the Jews, tried strategy in attacking their positions. He advanced against Beth-zur, a strong fortress of the Jews, was turned back, attacked again, and was defeated. Judas sent into the garrison whatever was necessary. But Rhodicus, a man from the ranks of the Jews, gave secret information to the enemy. He was sought for, caught, and put in prison. The king negotiated a second time with the people in Beth-zur, gave pledges, received theirs, withdrew, attacked Judas and his men, was defeated. He got word that Philip, who had been left in charge of the government, had revolted in Antioch. He was dismayed, called in the Jews, yielded and swore to observe all their rites, settled with them and offered sacrifice, honored the sanctuary, and showed generosity to the holy place. He received Maccabees, left Hegemonides as governor from Ptolemais to Gerar, and went to Ptolemais. The people of Ptolemais were indignant over the treaty. In fact, they were so angry that they wanted to annul its terms. Lysias took the public platform, made the best possible defense, convinced them, appeased them, gained their goodwill, and set out for Antioch. This is how the king's attack and withdrawal turned out. 2 Maccabees chapter 14. 3 years later, word came to Judas and his men that Demetrius, son of Seleucus, had sailed into the harbor of Tripolis with a strong army and a fleet, and had taken possession of the country, having made away with Antiochus and his guardian Lysias. Now a certain Alcimus, who had formerly been high priest, but had willfully defiled himself in the days of separation, realized that there was no way for him to be safe or to have access again to the holy altar, and went to King Demetrius in about the 151st year, presenting to him a crown of gold and a palm, and besides these some of the customary olive branches from the temple. During that day he kept quiet, but he found an opportunity that furthered his mad purpose when he was invited by Demetrius to a meeting of the council, and was asked about the attitude and intentions of the Jews. He answered, "Those of the Jews who are called Hasidians, whose leader is Judas Maccabees, are keeping up war and stirring up sedition, and will not let the kingdom attain tranquility. Therefore I have laid aside my ancestral glory, the high priesthood, and have now come here, first because I am genuinely concerned for the interests of the king, and second because I have regard also for my compatriots. For through the folly of those whom I have mentioned, our whole nation is now in no small misfortune. Since you are acquainted, O king, with the details of this matter, may it please you to take thought for our country and our hard-pressed nation with the gracious kindness that you show to all. For as long as Judas lives, it is impossible for the government to find peace." When he had said this, the rest of the king's friends, who were hostile to Judas, quickly inflamed Demetrius still more. He immediately chose Nicanor, who had been in command of the elephants, appointed him governor of Judea, and sent him off with orders to kill Judas and scatter his troops, and to install Alcimus as high priest of the great temple. And the nations throughout Judea, who had fled before Judas, flocked to join Nicanor, thinking that the misfortunes and calamities of the Jews would mean prosperity for themselves. When the Jews heard of Nicanor's coming and the gathering of the nations, they sprinkled dust on their heads and prayed to him who established his own people forever and always upholds his own heritage by manifesting himself. At the command of the leader, they set out from there immediately and engaged them in battle at a village called Desol. Simon, the brother of Judas, had encountered Nicanor, but had been temporarily checked because of the sudden consternation created by the enemy. Nevertheless, Nicanor, hearing of the valor of Judas and his troops and their courage in battle for their country, shrank from deciding the issue by bloodshed. Therefore he sent Posidonius, Theodotus, and Mattathias to give and receive pledges of friendship. When the terms had been fully considered, and the leader had informed the people, and it had appeared that they were of one mind, they agreed to the covenant. The leaders set a day on which to meet by themselves. A chariot came forward from each army. Seats of honor were set in place. Judas posted army men in readiness at key places to prevent sudden treachery on the part of the enemy. So they duly held the consultation. Nicanor stayed on in Jerusalem and did nothing out of the way, but dismissed the flocks of people who had gathered, and he kept Judas always in his presence. He was warmly attached to the man. He urged him to marry and have children, so Judas married, settled down, and shared the common life. But when Alcimus noticed their goodwill for one another, he took the covenant that had been made and went to Demetrius. He told him that Nicanor was disloyal to the government, since he had appointed that conspirator against the kingdom, Judas, to be his successor. The king became excited and, provoked by the false accusations of that depraved man, wrote to Nicanor, stating that he was displeased with the covenant and commanding him to send Maccabees to Antioch as a prisoner without delay. When this message came to Nicanor, he was troubled and grieved that he had to annul their agreement when the man had done no wrong. Since it was not possible to oppose the king, he watched for an opportunity to accomplish this by a stratagem. But Maccabees, noticing that Nicanor was more austere in his dealings with him and was meeting him more rudely than had been his custom, concluded that this austerity did not spring from the best motives. So he gathered not a few of his men and went into hiding from Nicanor. When the latter became aware that he had been cleverly outwitted by the man, he went to the great and holy temple while the priests were offering the customary sacrifices and commanded them to hand the man over. When they declared on oath that they did not know where the man was whom he wanted, he stretched out his right hand toward the sanctuary and swore this oath: "If you do not hand Judas over to me as a prisoner, I will level this shrine of God to the ground and tear down the altar and build here a splendid temple to Dionysus." Having said this, he went away. Then the priests stretched out their hands toward heaven and called upon the constant defender of our nation in these words: "O Lord of all, though you have need of nothing, you were pleased that there should be a temple for your habitation among us. So now, O Holy One, Lord of all holiness, keep undefiled forever this house that has been so recently purified." A certain Razis, one of the elders of Jerusalem, was denounced to Nicanor as a man who loved his compatriots and was very well thought of, and for his goodwill was called Father of the Jews. For before the days of separation he had been accused of Judaism, and he had most zealously risked body and life for Judaism. Nicanor, wishing to exhibit the enmity that he had for the Jews, sent more than 500 soldiers to arrest him, for he thought that by arresting him he would do them an injury. When the troops were about to capture the tower and were forcing the door of the courtyard, they ordered that fire be brought and the doors burned. Being surrounded, Razis fell upon his sword, preferring to die nobly rather than to fall into the hands of sinners and suffer outrages unworthy of his noble birth. But in the heat of the struggle he did not hit exactly, and the crowd was now rushing in through the doors. He courageously ran up on the wall and bravely threw himself down into the crowd. But as they quickly drew back, a space opened, and he fell in the middle of the empty space. Still alive and aflame with anger, he rose, and though his blood gushed forth and his wounds were severe, he ran through the crowd, and standing upon a steep rock, with his blood now completely drained from him, he tore out his entrails, took them in both hands, and hurled them at the crowd, calling upon the Lord of life and spirit to give them back to him again. This was the manner of his death. 2 Maccabees chapter 15. When Nicanor heard that Judas and his troops were in the region of Samaria, he made plans to attack them with complete safety on the day of rest. When the Jews who were compelled to follow him said, "Do not destroy so savagely and barbarously, but show respect for the day that he who sees all things has honored and hallowed above other days," the thrice accursed wretch asked if there were a sovereign in heaven who had commanded the keeping of the Sabbath day. When they declared, "It is the living Lord himself, the sovereign in heaven, who ordered us to observe the seventh day," he replied, "But I am a sovereign also on earth, and I command you to take up arms and finish the king's business." Nevertheless, he did not succeed in carrying out his abominable design. This Nicanor, in his utter boastfulness and arrogance, had determined to erect a public monument of victory over Judas and his forces. But Maccabeus did not cease to trust with all confidence that he would get help from the Lord. He exhorted his troops not to fear the attack of the nations, but to keep in mind the former times when help had come to them from heaven, and so to look for the victory that the Almighty would give them. Encouraging them from the law and the prophets, and reminding them also of the struggles they had won, he made them the more eager. When he had aroused their courage, he issued his orders, at the same time pointing out the treachery of the nations and their violation of oaths. He armed each of them not so much with confidence in shields and spears as with the inspiration of brave words, and he cheered them all by relating a dream, a sort of vision that was worthy of belief. What he saw was this: Onias, who had been high priest, a noble and good man, of modest bearing and gentle manner, one who spoke fittingly and had been trained from childhood in all that belongs to excellence, was praying with outstretched hands for the whole body of the Jews. Then, in the same fashion, another appeared, distinguished by his gray hair and dignity, and of marvelous majesty and authority. And Onias spoke, saying, "This is a man who loves the family of Israel, and prays much for the people and the holy city, Jeremiah, the prophet of God. Jeremiah stretched out his right hand and gave to Judas a golden sword. And as he gave it, he addressed him thus: "Take this holy sword, a gift from God, with which you will strike down your adversaries." Encouraged by the words of Judas, so noble and so effective in arousing valor and awakening courage in the souls of the young, they determined not to carry on a campaign, but to attack bravely and to decide the matter by fighting hand to hand with all courage, because the city and the sanctuary and the temple were in danger. Their concern for wives and children, and also for brothers and sisters and relatives, lay upon them less heavily. Their greatest and first fear was for the consecrated sanctuary, and those who had to remain in the city were in no little distress, being anxious over the encounter in the open country. When all were now looking forward to the coming issue, and the enemy was already close at hand, with their army drawn up for battle, the elephants strategically stationed and the cavalry deployed on the flanks, Maccabees, observing the masses that were in front of him, and the varied supply of arms and the savagery of the elephants, stretched out his hands toward heaven, and called upon the Lord who works wonders. For he knew that it is not by arms, but as the Lord decides, that he gains the victory for those who deserve it. He called upon him in these words: "O Lord, you sent your angel in the time of King Hezekiah of Judea, and he killed fully 185,000 in the camp of Sennacherib. So now, O sovereign of the heavens, send a good angel to spread terror and trembling before us. By the might of your arm, may these blasphemers who come against your holy people be struck down." With these words, he ended his prayer. Nicanor and his troops advanced with trumpets and battle songs, but Judas and his troops met the enemy in battle with invocations to God and prayers. So, fighting with their hands and praying to God in their hearts, they laid low at least 35,000, and were greatly gladdened by God's manifestation. When the action was over, and they were returning with joy, they recognized Nicanor lying dead in full armor. Then there was shouting and tumult, and they blessed the sovereign Lord in the language of their ancestors. Then the man who was ever in body and soul the defender of his people, the man who maintained his youthful goodwill toward his compatriots, ordered them to cut off Nicanor's head and arm and carry them to Jerusalem. When he arrived there and had called his compatriots together and stationed the priests before the altar, he sent for those who were in the citadel. He showed them the vile Nicanor's head and that profane man's arm, which had been boastfully stretched out against the holy house of the Almighty. He cut out the tongue of the ungodly Nicanor and said that he would feed it piecemeal to the birds, and would hang up these rewards of his folly opposite the sanctuary. And they all, looking to heaven, blessed the Lord who had manifested himself, saying, "Blessed is he who has kept his own place undefiled." Judas hung Nicanor's head from the citadel, a clear and conspicuous sign to everyone of the help of the Lord. And they all decreed by public vote never to let this day go unobserved, but to celebrate the 13th day of the 12th month, which is called Adar in the Aramaic language, the day before Mordecai's day. This, then, is how matters turned out with Nicanor, and from that time the city has been in the possession of the Hebrews. So I will here end my story. If it is well told and to the point, that is what I myself desired. If it is poorly done and mediocre, that was the best I could do. For just as it is harmful to drink wine alone, or, again, to drink water alone, while wine already mixed with water is delicious and enhances one's enjoyment, so also the style of the story delights the ears of those who read the work. And here will be the end. 1 Esdras chapter 1. Josiah kept the Passover to his Lord in Jerusalem. He killed the Passover lamb on the 14th day of the first month, having placed the priests according to their divisions, arrayed in their vestments, in the temple of the Lord. He told the Levites, the temple servants of Israel, that they should sanctify themselves to the Lord, and put the holy ark of the Lord in the house that King Solomon, son of David, had built. And he said, You need no longer carry it on your shoulders. Now worship the Lord your God and serve his nation Israel. Prepare yourselves by your families and kindred, in accordance with the directions of King David of Israel, and the magnificence of his son Solomon. Stand in order in the temple according to the groupings of the ancestral houses of you Levites, who minister before your kindred, the people of Israel, and kill the Passover lamb, and prepare the sacrifices for your kindred, and keep the Passover according to the commandment of the Lord that was given to Moses. To the people who were present, Josiah gave 30,000 lambs and kids and 3,000 calves. These were given from the king's possessions, as he promised, to the people and the priests and Levites. Hilkiah, Zechariah, and Jehiel, the chief officers of the temple, gave to the priests for the Passover 2,600 sheep and 300 calves. And Jeconiah and Shemaiah and his brother Nethanel and Hashabiah and Achiel and Joram, captains over thousands, gave the Levites for the Passover 5,000 sheep and 700 calves. This is what took place. The priests and the Levites, having the unleavened bread, stood in proper order according to kindred and the grouping of the ancestral houses, before the people, to make the offering to the Lord as it is written in the book of Moses. This they did in the morning. They roasted the Passover lamb with fire, as required, and they boiled the sacrifices in bronze pots and cauldrons, with a pleasing odor, and carried them to all the people. Afterward they prepared the Passover for themselves and for their kindred the priests, the sons of Aaron, because the priests were offering the fat until nightfall. So the Levites prepared it for themselves and for their kindred the priests, the sons of Aaron. The temple singers, the sons of Asaph, were in their place according to the arrangement made by David, and also Asaph, Zechariah, and Edenis, who represented the king. The gatekeepers were at each gate. No one needed to interrupt his daily duties, for their kindred the Levites prepared the Passover for them. So the things that had to do with the sacrifices to the Lord were accomplished that day. The Passover was kept, and the sacrifices were offered on the altar of the Lord, according to the command of King Josiah. And the people of Israel who were present at that time kept the Passover and the festival of unleavened bread 7 days. No Passover like it had been kept in Israel since the times of the prophet Samuel. None of the kings of Israel had kept such a Passover as was kept by Josiah, and the priests and Levites and the people of Judah and all of Israel who were living in Jerusalem. In the 18th year of the reign of Josiah, this Passover was kept. And the deeds of Josiah were upright in the sight of the Lord, for his heart was full of godliness. In ancient times the events of his reign have been recorded, concerning those who sinned and acted wickedly toward the Lord beyond any other nation or kingdom, and how they grieved the Lord deeply, so that the words of the Lord fell upon Israel. After all these acts of Josiah, it happened that Pharaoh, king of Egypt, went to make war at Carchemish on the Euphrates, and Josiah went out against him. And the king of Egypt sent word to him, saying, What have we to do with each other, O king of Judea? I was not sent against you by the Lord God, for my war is at the Euphrates. And now the Lord is with me. The Lord is with me, urging me on. Stand aside and do not oppose the Lord. Josiah, however, did not turn back to his chariot, but tried to fight with him and did not heed the words of the prophet Jeremiah from the mouth of the Lord. He joined battle with him in the plain of Megiddo, and the commanders came down against King Josiah. The king said to his servants, Take me away from the battle, for I am very weak. And immediately his servants took him out of the line of battle. He got into his second chariot, and after he was brought back to Jerusalem, he died and was buried in the tomb of his ancestors. In all Judea they mourned for Josiah. The prophet Jeremiah lamented for Josiah, and the principal men, with the women, have made lamentation for him to this day. It was ordained that this should always be done throughout the whole people of Israel. These things are written in the book of the histories of the kings of Judea. And every one of the acts of Josiah and his splendor and his understanding of the law of the Lord and the things that he had done before, and these that are now told are recorded in the book of the kings of Israel and Judah. The people of the nation took Jeconiah, son of Josiah, who was 23 years old, and made him king in succession to his father Josiah. He reigned 3 months in Judah and Jerusalem. Then the king of Egypt deposed him from reigning in Jerusalem, and fined the nation 100 talents of silver and 1 talent of gold. The king of Egypt made his brother Jehoiakim king of Judea and Jerusalem. Jehoiakim put the nobles in prison, and seized his brother Zarius, and brought him back from Egypt. Jehoiakim was 25 years old when he began to reign in Judea and Jerusalem. He did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon came up against him. He bound him with a chain of bronze and took him away to Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar also took some holy vessels of the Lord and carried them away and stored them in his temple in Babylon. But the things that are reported about Jehoiakim and his uncleanness and impiety are written in the annals of the kings. His son Jehoiakim became king in his place. When he was made king, he was 18 years old, and he reigned 3 months and 10 days in Jerusalem. He did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. A year later, Nebuchadnezzar sent and removed him to Babylon with the holy vessels of the Lord, and made Zedekiah king of Judea and Jerusalem. Zedekiah was 21 years old, and he reigned 11 years. He also did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, and did not heed the words spoken by the prophet Jeremiah from the mouth of the Lord. Although King Nebuchadnezzar had made him swear by the name of the Lord, he broke his oath and rebelled. He stiffened his neck and hardened his heart, and transgressed the laws of the Lord, the God of Israel. Even the leaders of the people and of the priests committed many acts of sacrilege and lawlessness, beyond all the unclean deeds of all the nations, and polluted the temple of the Lord in Jerusalem, the temple that God had made holy. The God of their ancestors sent his messenger to call them back, because he would have spared them and his dwelling place. But they mocked his messengers, and whenever the Lord spoke, they scoffed at his prophets, until God, in his anger against his nation because of their ungodly acts, gave the command to bring the kings of the Chaldeans against them. The Chaldeans killed their young men with the sword around their holy temple, and did not spare young man or young woman, elder or child, for he gave them all into their hands. They took all the holy vessels of the Lord, great and small, the treasure chests of the Lord, and the royal stores, and carried them away to Babylon. They burned the house of the Lord, broke down the walls of Jerusalem, burned its towers with fire, and utterly destroyed all its glorious things. Nebuchadnezzar led the survivors away to Babylon with the sword, and they were servants to him and to his sons, until the Persians began to reign, in fulfillment of the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah, saying, "Until the land has enjoyed its Sabbaths, it shall keep Sabbath all the time of its desolation, until the completion of 70 years." 1 Esdras chapter 2. In the first year of Cyrus as king of the Persians, so that the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah might be accomplished, the Lord stirred up the spirit of King Cyrus of the Persians, and he made a proclamation throughout all his kingdom, and also put it in writing. Thus says Cyrus, king of the Persians, "The Lord of Israel, the Lord Most High, has made me king of the world, and he has commanded me to build him a house in Jerusalem, which is in Judea. If any of you, therefore, are of his nation, may your Lord be with you. Go up to Jerusalem, which is in Judea, and build the house of the Lord of Israel. He is the Lord who dwells in Jerusalem. And let each of you, wherever you may live, be helped by your neighbors with gold and silver, with gifts and with horses and cattle, besides the other things added as votive offerings for the temple of the Lord that is in Jerusalem." Then arose the heads of families of the tribes of Judah and Benjamin, and the priests and the Levites, and all whose spirit the Lord had stirred to go up to build the house in Jerusalem for the Lord. Their neighbors helped them with everything, with silver and gold, with horses and cattle, and with a very great number of votive offerings from many whose hearts were stirred. King Cyrus also brought out the holy vessels of the Lord that Nebuchadnezzar had carried away from Jerusalem and stored in his temple of idols. When King Cyrus of the Persians brought these out, he gave them to Mithridates, his treasurer, and by him they were given to Sheshbazzar, the governor of Judea. The number of these was 1,000 gold cups, 1,000 silver cups, 29 silver censers, 30 gold bowls, 2,410 silver bowls, and 1,000 other vessels. All the vessels were handed over, gold and silver, 5,469, and they were carried back by Sheshbazzar with the returning exiles from Babylon to Jerusalem. In the time of King Artaxerxes of the Persians, Bishlam, Mithridates, Tabeel, Rehum, Beltethmus, the scribe Shimshai, and the rest of their associates living in Samaria and other places wrote him the following letter against those who were living in Judea and Jerusalem. To King Artaxerxes our Lord, your servants the recorder Rehum and the scribe Shimshai, and the other members of their council, and the judges in Coele-Syria and Phoenicia, let it now be known to our Lord the King that the Jews who came up from you to us have gone to Jerusalem, and are building that rebellious and wicked city, repairing its marketplaces and walls, and laying the foundations for a temple. Now if this city is built and the walls finished, they will not only refuse to pay tribute, but will even resist kings. Since the building of the temple is now going on, we think it best not to neglect such a matter, but to speak to our Lord the King, in order that, if it seems good to you, search may be made in the records of your ancestors. You will find in the annals what has been written about them, and will learn that this city was rebellious, troubling both kings and other cities, and that the Jews were rebels and kept setting up blockades in it from of old. That is why this city was laid waste. Therefore we now make known to you, O Lord and King, that if this city is built and its walls finished, you will no longer have access to Coele-Syria and Phoenicia. Then the king, in reply to the recorder Rehum, Beltethmus, the scribe Shimshai, and the others associated with them, and living in Samaria and Syria and Phoenicia, wrote as follows. I have read the letter that you sent me, so I ordered search to be made, and it has been found that this city from of old has fought against kings, and the people in it were given to rebellion and war, and that mighty and cruel kings ruled in Jerusalem and exacted tribute from Coele-Syria and Phoenicia. Therefore I have now issued orders to prevent these people from building the city, and to take care that nothing more be done, and that such wicked proceedings go no further to the annoyance of kings. Then, when the letter from King Artaxerxes was read, Rehum and the scribe Shimshai and their associates went quickly to Jerusalem, with cavalry and a large number of armed troops, and began to hinder the builders. And the building of the temple in Jerusalem stopped until the 2nd year of the reign of King Darius of the Persians.